Okay, and welcome back to 0xp Studio, 0xp Dev. So we're finished off with our tutorials. We're going to start looking into some game design document templates. Not sure if we're going to start that tonight. We might start actually doing our design document tomorrow night. But we're going to have a look, see where we want to start with them, like if there's any templates or something that we want to use. So let's pull up our screens here. First of all, you'll see, so we've got the 0xp Studio YouTube channel. Make sure to check it out. It's an archive of all our streams that we've done so far. We'll be keeping everything up to date on there. We're a couple of streams behind, but I'll be updating those in the next few days, so hopefully on the weekend. Last week's and this week's up. In the meantime, I've pulled up some
game design document.
Pulled up some searches.
Getting started making games.
Do you know what the worst part of developing a game is? Project organization. At first, it seems manageable doing some sketches and jotting down notes, but after a while, it becomes a literal nightmare. Now, I've spent years trying to find a better system to plan out and organize.
There's some videos I bought. Sure.
Hi.
Let's pull up. Videos here.
So I was
Start
watching
going
this
through these.
video by this studio called What's Happening? I'm
The
shrinking.
other side, I'm going to start
Hold on.
through some of these tutorial,
Much better.
templates
I was watching this
that
video
we've
by a
pulled up.
studio called Bite Me Games.
See.
In Bite Me Games,
Say
they
you
made this
can work
video
on it.
about basically if they started making games from scratch, what would they do differently? I thought it was a great video. The link is below to watch that video. I'm going to offer my 2 cents. So here are 10 things that I would do completely different if I started my game studio again. Specifically, if I started my game studio making the game we're currently making, which is called Twisted Tower. It's currently published by 3D Realms. 3D Realms did Duke Nukem. What else did they do? Wolfenstein, Max Payne. All great games. So I'm really thrilled to be working with 3D Realms, but it took 3 years to freaking get there. 3 years of working with my small team, spending money, spending time, trying to get there at that moment where we finally signed with the publisher of our dreams. So here are 10 things I would do differently. First things first. This is gonna help you so much. Figure out your hook. Figure out your hook. What is a hook? Well, it's a freaking hook. It captures your audience. They bite onto that hook and they what? Buy your game. What does that mean? It means they give you their money. And that's great. So what I want you to do is think about what's the thing that's gonna actually sell your game? What's the thing that's gonna make you money? And that is your hook. Now for me, I call it a Trinity hook. And I say for me because every studio is doing this. They're thinking about the hook. But for me, I think about the Trinity hook. I've talked about this before. Trinity hook is what's your visual hook, what's your mechanical hook, and what's your story hook. You need to be thinking about those things and test it with your social media. If you have even the smallest following on social media, bring that up. Bring up what you think your hook is, what makes your game special. Pitch it to your audience and see what they say. A lot of times we think a hook is a hook, and it's not a hook. It's like well, actually, there's no bait on it. It's a rusty, boring hook. That's oftentimes what most indie game developers' hooks look like. So you need to test it with your audience. Once you figure out your hook, once you find out what really makes your game shine, what I want you to think about is number 2, figure out your loop, okay? A lot of people get confused by, okay, there's a hook and then there's a loop. And oftentimes this stuff is put into what's called a GDD, which is a game design Bible. A loop is completely different than your hook. A loop is the thing, see that? That's a loop. The thing that your players will do over and over and over and over. But it's fun, it gets funner and funner and funner. That's what a gameplay loop is. And you want to figure out what that is. But the most important thing, and this is why I'm saying this is the second thing that I would do differently. You correlate it to your hook. You figure out your hook and then you figure out what? Your loop. And your loop has to correlate to the hook. So for example, if you're making a game where you break blocks and go deeper and deeper into a cave that's procedurally generated, aka Minecraft, that's not enough. That's a cool hook, but then you've got to incorporate a loop, something you do over and over again. So for example, with Minecraft, the loop is you dig and explore, but the creepers come out, so you go back to your house, you build your house, upgrade, and do it again and again and again and again with the day-night cycle, right? Every great game's loop correlates to the hook. So that's what I want you to figure out. Write that down in what's called a GDD. It doesn't matter if it's a text document, just write it down and call it your GDD. Number 3, I need you to play games that are similar to your game, not only in their hook or their loop or their genre, play games that are similar in scope. What that means is budget. So if you're an indie game developer and you have no money or no time, you don't really have much time to make a game, or your schedule kind of sucks and you're working full time or you're in school, I need you to play games that were made by developers in a similar situation with a similar scope, a similar schedule. So if you want to make an MMO, don't. That's the first rule. The second rule is if you want to make, let's say, a platformer, think about games that have a similar scope to yours. And I want you to go and play those games and then write down exactly what makes those games special, what makes them shine. Before we talk about that, I did want to let you know that for the spring sale, Full-Time Game Dev is 50% off right now. You're also going to get my art programs totally free. We'll talk about it more at the end of this video, but if you're interested, click the link in the description. I know it sounds silly to tell you to play games, but this is so hard to do as an indie game developer. And if you're somebody who struggles with this, let me know in the comments below if you struggle with playing games, because I don't play games, and I know that I should, but I don't play games. So in your GDD, after you've written down your hook and your loop, I need you to write down why these games, these similar games, why they shine. And every decision you make is going to correlate to those 3 things: your hook, your loop, and then also trying to mimic and echo what made the... Jebby, stop licking your butt. Okay, come on. You're making me sick. Figure out what makes those games shine. Do it similarly, obviously. Put your little twist on it, make it a little bit better. Next, number 4, what I would do differently is focus on a prototype that looks like crap, but feels amazing. That prototype, it doesn't need to look good. It can be black and white. It can be just simple squares, a simple block out, nothing special, but build it out so that it feels really, really good. And the way we do this is everything that we build is focused on those first 3 things. So it's kind of like you wouldn't put the framing up for a house before you built the foundation. The same is true here. You wouldn't build a prototype until you knew what your hook was, until you knew what your loop was, and until you knew the games you were trying to mimic. Build out your prototype with these 3 things in mind. Now, this one's weird, but it's about scale, okay? So number 5 is scale. Think about scale. What I mean here is the units of measurement for your game. I didn't do this with my previous games, and it caused so many problems in the long run because I wouldn't think about jump height. I wouldn't think about the distance of a swing for a sword. I didn't think about the values of a jump or move speed for enemies. I didn't think about any of that. I just sort of shot from the hip and made a game. Now that's cool and it's fun, but it's not fun when you're 4 months before launch and then none of your measurements are correct and you have to go in and ultimately suck it up and actually focus on the math. Might as well just focus on the math at the beginning of the game's development. So if you have the prototype made and it's focused on your hook and it's focused on your loop, then you can lock in your measurements. And you can use Unity's 2D grid or 3D grid to start building out your world using those measurements. The jump height, the player speed, the player dash length, the enemy jump height, the enemy attack radius. All of these things should be, frankly, written down in your GDD. These are my measurements for every little thing in the game. That way you can hyper fine tune all of those measurements, and every decision you make about the visuals of the game, we'll talk about that in a second, every decision you make about the visuals of the game are correlated to those measurements. Now they'll change and you'll tweak them, but at least you have a foundation. Okay, we've got our game made. It's focused on the loop. It's focused on the hook. I'm going to harp on that forever. It has a very specific genre that harkens to other games. We've got our measurements down. We've got our gameplay down in a prototype. What's next? Well, this is a mistake that I made, and I ended up creating this way too late, and it caused us to this chair's in the way. It caused us to recreate everything we had made a year prior for Twisted Tower. I wish I would have created this earlier. I need you to create a visual Bible for your game. This is kind of like going to, I don't know if you've ever built a house before, or maybe you've, I don't know, worked with a builder in a neighborhood. They'll take you to a design studio. Let's say you're gonna build a house with a builder. They'll call you up and say, hey, come meet us at the design studio, and we're gonna pick out all of our designs for the house. Instead of you picking out the designs and then putting there, and then you see it and then you hate it, and then you have to repaint a wall and take down a light, remove the floors. Instead of that, what they do is they give you samples, and you put it together on a table, and you look at all of the visuals. You see it all, and you can get a good idea of what exactly it is you want for your house. This is cheap, right? You're not spending any money, you're just spending time. And then you commit to it, you sign a document, and that is the path moving forward. The same is true with your game. Now, obviously, you're gonna make changes along the way, but at least you can build a foundation at the very beginning of your game's development. So here's what you need to do. You need to start putting together mock-ups, concepts, screenshots, logos, color schemes, fonts. You need to do all of that and put it inside of your GDD. Now, this is gonna take some time, and it's also gonna take a lot of guess and check work. You would think a logo might look good in orange, but really it looks good in red. You thought this font would look cool, but instead it looks better with this font. You want to do this in a GDD as opposed to with your game, so that you don't have to spend all that time building it out in your game and then removing it and putting in something else. Instead, do it in a Photoshop document, get those images together and put it in your GDD. And now you know moving forward what your game is supposed to look like. The next mistake I made is I didn't make a 10-minute demo, despite the fact that I talk about this all the time on my channel. With Twisted Tower, I did not make a 10-minute demo. Instead, I made a 2-hour experience, and I didn't even have that first 10 minutes polished. What I think you should do is take all of those previous elements we created and build out that 10-minute hyper-polished demo. This demo needs to be almost an exact representative of what your game is going to be in the final product. So instead of building out 2 hours of gameplay and taking years to do that, what I want you to do is just build a 10-minute demo. Focus all of your energy on taking all of the elements we created, including that visual Bible, and bringing that into your game. The reason why is because, number one, you can use a demo to get funding. How many of you right now would take a deal from a publisher if they offered you $100,000 in exchange for a 40% rev share and 60% your favor? How many of you would do it? Let me know in the comments. What this means is you can go full time. You can go full time with just a demo. I know it sounds like a pie in the sky, or I'm like lying to you, but I've done it 4 times. It's really just like finding investment money. That's kind of what working with a publisher is. It helps you go full time so that you're not constantly a hobbyist and stressing out in the evenings trying to finish your game. Instead, you could take that hyper polished demo, convert it to $100,000, and then finish your game full time. Now, if you don't want to work with a publisher, you could take that 10-minute demo and do a Kickstarter campaign. You could take that 10-minute demo and submit it to Steam as a demo for Steam Next Fest and get 100,000 wish lists, and then self-publish your game with 100,000 wish lists that convert at a 10 to 20% conversion rate. What have you just made? You've made, well, let's say it's a $10 game. I can't even do the freaking math. It's $10 times a 10% conversion rate, 10,000. Oh, you just made 100 grand. So that is the importance of a demo. A demo on Steam with the Steam Next Fest is a great way to get a ton of wish lists. So you can see here there are 3 use cases for a hyper polished demo. So if you just go ahead and do that, you can reduce a ton of stress on you, because you can, well, hopefully go full time with a publisher or a Kickstarter campaign. And if you don't want to do that, you can at least have this, I don't know, a warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that you have 100,000 wish lists, and when you launch your game, you're almost certainly going to make a significant amount of money. Number 8, put together a team to replicate what you've done in that hyper polished demo. What do I mean by replicate? I mean build out a system of rules, resources in your GDD, and help guide a small team to extend your tiny little prototype and build it into a full game. Why am I having you build out a team now and not while you're building a prototype? Because when you're building out a prototype, you personally are highly involved. You're basically building out a small little shed. And that shed, with that knowledge, you can then convert that knowledge into building out a house with the help of a team. Same is true with a game. Now that you know how to build that prototype, you can create systems and you can create resources so that your team can almost autopilot create your vision for a full game. Now, how you build out a team is up to you. Let me know in the comments some great Discord servers that you guys love. Seriously, I'll pin that and you guys can, do the work for me of what Discord servers are really helpful, because with Discord servers, you could find people who are interested in partnering with you and doing the work pro bono, frankly. I mean, you can return the favor as well. Now, if you don't want to find someone to do pro bono work, you can always pay someone part-time, maybe even 2 hours a week if you have some funds, or if you've done a Kickstarter campaign, or you've signed with a publisher. And you could find contract workers who can help you build out your game. And I had to do this slowly. You don't just jump in and hire a bunch of full-time contract workers. Instead, you slowly make one hire after another, part-time to full-time, maybe bring in another part-time developer. And I've slowly done this to build out a team of, well, I had 2 full-timers, now it's 1 full-timer, part-timer, and then a part-timer as well. This is expensive, but it's a lot less expensive than if you're doing all the work yourself, especially on things that you're not fast at and things that are not your forte. Number 9, project management tool. I wish I would have started using this years ago. I use ClickUp now, and I actually pay a fee every month to keep using this. ClickUp is freaking incredible. Now, ClickUp is not the only project management tool out there. There's Trello, there's Monday.com. The cool thing about ClickUp is I can assign tasks to all of my team members. I can assign deadlines. Inside of the task, I can provide a description of exactly what I want. And the best part is I can even record my screen and with ClickUp, just paste video after video after video explaining exactly what I need for my project. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, Thomas, why don't you just do the work yourself? What's wrong with you? Well, I've done that. That's the first point. I've done that, and I'm exhausted. I'm getting old, so I want to get some help. But number 2, guys, you can compress down 3 years of making a game solo. You can compress it down into 1 year if you have 3 people working with you. So if you could build out systems on ClickUp, what I mean by systems is rules, resources, deadlines, exact descriptions, video tutorials, even just teaching your team how to do certain things inside of Unity and how you want it done in your game, it can go a long way. Right now, I've got 3 team members who are just following the rails I've provided them and creating Twisted Tower while I talk to a camera. That's really cool. And they love it. You know, they love me. They worship me. They wash my feet. No, but they really do. They really do love working on the project. At least that's what they tell me. Number 10, and this is what Bite Me Games mentioned at the end of their video as well. Start a YouTube channel. I've been sort of thinking about YouTube a lot lately. I'm so grateful for YouTube because it's kind of this income stream that it's like what you call a passive income stream. It's not really passive because I actually have to do the work and talk. But YouTube is what you'd say the start of a funnel, and then that funnel converts to income. I'm very open about this on my channel. It converts to wish lists, which end up converting to sales of a game. You can also sell courses, you can sell digital products, you could sell, actual copies of your game when it launches. You can do sponsorship deals, you get ad revenue, you can do Patreon. I just listed 7 income sources just because of YouTube. YouTube is great and it brings in income. Why do we want income? So that we don't have to freak out when we're making our game and worry about, okay, is this game gonna make enough money for my salary or my team's salary for the next year? I never worry about that anymore. I don't worry about the performance of my games. I really don't, because I know that I always have a backup plan and then another backup plan and another backup plan, because I've got multiple social media accounts, and all of those accounts provide value to my followers, but there's also a small amount of followers who are willing to buy a product, course. So there's always money available while I'm making my games, and I don't have to stress out about the game sales. Granted, my games have sold well. I've worked with platforms, publishers, Kickstarter, which are all other income streams as well, ensuring that I always have a full-time salary for just me, just from my games. But think bigger than that. Passive income is a wonderful thing. It helps you sleep at night as an indie game developer. And if you can build your wealth...
Stuck, feeling like I'm in that super position. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about get a gauge slot moves end up in focused on to do some. You have a pretty good idea. So deadline questions. You're also not ideally on systems we've gotten when however, you will.
I came home from the first week of my desk job, sat alone in my office, and I cried. That cubicle was not my dream. My dream was making indie games. Even worse, 3 years had passed since I started a side project. It was this game called Pinstripe, and I'd worked on it completely solo, and I felt like I had made zero progress. Making games solo felt like I was at the gym and I got a call from my indie game publisher. They were tired of the delays, the tweaks, the constant changes. They wanted to launch my indie game Neversong in just 6 months. Honestly, I was panicked because I knew the game was nowhere near complete, and somehow I didn't even realize I was 2 years into development with hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Making games can be real daunting. Between art, programming, design, there's so much to do. Where do you even start? In this video, you'll get 6 steps to get you started. We'll also drop in some tips to help you learn fast. Step 1. Choose a good game engine. Game developers use powerful programs called game engines to make games. Game engines handle most of the complexity of drawing things, playing sounds, or calculating physics, which saves you a ton of time. The engine I recommend to learn is Godot. Unlike other engines like Unity, it comes with an accessible programming language made for game developers called GDScript. Using GDScript leads to writing shorter code than other languages, making it a bit easier and faster to learn. You will never be stuck with your first engine. The foundations and skills you will learn will stick with you when you decide to use another technology. Once you know how to program, it's really fast to pick up new languages. Regardless, Godot is one of the most powerful game engines out there, and it's especially great to make 2D games. Step 2. Join a community. It's best to have others to ask for support when learning. By joining an online community, you will learn a lot from others. You will see you are not alone in your struggles. You can ask questions and get help when that happens. You can find all the Godot communities on the engine's website and pick the platform you like most to hang out. The Discord server is very active. Step 3. Pick a ridiculously simple project. Making games can be really fun, but it also requires many skills. At first, what you need the most is to learn those skills. You'll learn so much in the beginning that it's best to make really short projects. I recommend to start with toys, like just a character that walks and jumps, a ball you can throw and bounce around, and all kinds of things that take little time to create and that are really playful. This approach allows you to do projects that will just take a week or 2 even as a hobby. Maybe you have a dream game idea. You'll want to set it aside while learning because you will not be able to make it initially. When you're new to making games, you largely underestimate the work that goes into it. For example, games like Final Fantasy or GTA are the work of hundreds of experienced professionals working full-time for years. That is millions of hours of work. Even a game like Stardew Valley, made by only one person, took 7 years. So start simple. Create a couple little toys or game mechanics, and soon you will be able to put them together into one complete little game. Step 4. Find good courses and tutorials. These days, you will find many courses and tutorials to get you started for free here on YouTube and on other websites. We prepared a complete learning path for you with many tutorials and courses that are entirely free. You will find everything you need to get started there. There's a link in the description below. We're also creating an in-depth course to learn game development from zero with Godot. We're on Kickstarter right now to fund this ambitious project. I'll let you know more at the end of the video. Step 5. Focus on programming at first. Every game is a computer program, so there's no way around learning that. It's the code and how the code expresses design ideas that makes the game a game. The idea here is to focus on learning just one skill at a time because there is so much to learn. If you try to practice design, art, music, sound, and programming all at once, it will slow you down a lot. Programming is what brings game to life, which is why I recommend focusing on it first. Regarding art and sound, you can get complete free asset packs from Kenny and Kay Lusberg. There are complete sets released in the public domain to create all kinds of games. You can use them to your heart's content. Step 6. Plan your projects to learn fast. Give yourself clear and short deadlines for every project and try to practice at least 30 minutes a day. Daily practice will help you build skills as fast as humanly possible. If you have a full-time job and a family and that's too much, pick whatever works for you.
As my games, but honestly, they never stuck. But like a cooling breeze on a hot summer's day, the perfect tool appeared to me. The one, the only, Milanote. So today I want to talk about my new and improved method for staying on track using Milanote, and how it's been crucial for my game Blizzard Blowout 64. Our story begins in 2009, when I just started getting into game development. I was trying to find software
Documents can be vital for keeping track of the details of your project. But if you're making a game for the first time, do you really need one? Are they actually important? And if they are, what's the best way to make one for your game? After all, there are many different ways to make a game design document in different formats and including different information. But while there are a lot of ways you could make one, there's generally only one reason for doing it in the first place. In this video, I'm going to show you some of the basic methods of approaching a game design document, how to decide what goes in it, and importantly, how to tell if you need one at all. If you're serious about learning how to write your own scripts, then try my online course, How to Code in Unity, where you'll learn the basics of C# scripting, how to solve problems with code, and best practice principles to help you start and finish your game. So why would you need a game design document? Generally speaking, all game design documents exist to do just one thing. They allow you to explain your game idea to someone else. That's it. This is the one reason for making a game design document, and if you ever find yourself unsure about whether or not you need one, this is the question to ask yourself. Will you need to communicate the details of your game to another person? At this point, you might be thinking that because you're working on your game alone, this means that you don't need a game design document. But it's not quite as simple as that, because the other person that you may need to communicate your idea to is probably going to be you. After all, the ideal process of translating a game idea that you have in your head into a real game would be to magically create it instantly, fully formed and exactly as you imagined it. But that's not possible, and even if it was, the reality is that your game idea, even if you have an exceptionally clear vision of what it should be like, will be incomplete. Things will change, new ideas will replace old ones, and as you start to build your game, the process of iteration will push its development in different directions. So where does that leave you? Does that mean that there's no point in making a game design document, since it's all going to change through iteration anyway? Not exactly. If your game is small enough, there's no reason that you can't keep the general idea in your head and then build out the details of your game through experimentation. But if you can't do that, because you're going to forget information that's important to the direction of your project, then you will need some kind of game design document to keep it on track. So assuming that you will need one, how do you make one? The concept of a game design document can be a surprisingly divisive topic, with some developers suggesting that they are completely obsolete. However, it's less the case that documenting your game's design is an obsolete practice, and more so that development processes in general have become more flexible. For example, when you think of a design document, then traditionally you might picture a large text file that's full to the brim with every detail of your game and how it's going to work. And if that's what you need for your project, then there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if you're making a game on your own, it's highly unlikely that you'll need to go into that much detail, at least not at first, since most of your game's finer features are likely to change as soon as you start putting them together. So what should you start with? A good place to start is the core concept of the game, which is typically a high-level description of what the player will do, and the game's design pillars, which are the design goals that every other decision you make about the game will be compared against. These will typically be up to around 4 or 5 of the most important elements of your game that reflect what the player will be spending their time doing and how you want that to make them feel. These should be broad concepts and activities, like exploration, combat, or crafting. They can even be abstract emotions or experiences, like teamwork, discovery, or creativity. Whatever you pick, resist the urge to add more and more design pillars in order to accommodate all of the ideas that you have for your game. The point here is to identify what's most important, and that means leaving everything else out, including features that may end up in your project but that aren't vital to its identity. These core elements might be tricky to pin down, but it's important to get this bit right, since all of your game's finer details and decisions will need to support the design pillars in some way. Along with the overarching design principles, a basic game design document might also include some of the game's main mechanics or controls, so that it's possible to get an idea of what the game will be like to play. You might also add any early ideas you have for the game's visual style, what it might sound like, or what kind of music might end up being used. Or if the narrative of the game is important, this is where you might outline the basic story. Finally, you could add a rough timeline with some milestones that you're hoping to hit during development. This is a very basic design document, but it's probably going to be more than enough to get you started, at least to identify what you should be working on first, and enough to prompt most of the design decisions you're going to have to make in the early stages of your game. The general idea is to start with a one-page document like this, and transition to a more detailed design document that spans multiple pages, and that might include specific mechanics, story elements, or style guides as your game gets bigger and more complex. But large written design documents can be difficult to maintain, and importantly, difficult to use, which is a big problem. After all, your design document is useless if nobody, yourself included, is willing to read it. Which is why the format of your design document is at least as important as what's in it. Format matters, and I can prove it. Imagine you're building your own house. In your head, you know exactly how it's going to look, and every window, every wall, every perfectly placed brick is amazingly a crystal clear image in your mind. It's beautiful, but you can't build houses, so you hire a builder, and now you need to communicate your idea to someone else. You need a design document. But can you imagine trying to explain to a builder what your dream house is supposed to look like using a Word document? Even if your description was perfect, beautifully organised and well written, a text document for this purpose makes no sense and would be extremely difficult or outright impossible to actually use. It doesn't matter how good the information is, if it's in the wrong format, it's not going to help you. Whereas a blueprint of the house, even though it contains the same information, would be much more useful to the builder. As a result, when you make any kind of design document, first you'll need to decide what's going to go in it, and then you'll need to decide the best way to present it. So how do you decide what goes in it? What goes in your design document depends heavily on who it's for. For example, if you're pitching your game to someone who is considering whether or not to invest money in it, then the format of your design document should reflect that. It should explain how you plan to market the game, who it's targeted at, and why you believe it will be successful. Chances are, however, that the first kind of design document you're likely to want to make is one that helps you to actually design the game. And in many cases, just like when building your house, being able to see what it's supposed to look like is usually a good place to start. And one way to do that is with the one-page method. The one-page method is a game design document approach that focuses your ideas and helps you to present them in a way that's easy to use. This method was described by Stone Lebrande in his one-page design GDC talk, and typically involves using illustrations, charts or maps along with call-out information to describe how a feature or a mechanic or an entire area of your game is supposed to work, all from a single page. But why one page? There are a couple of reasons why limiting your design document to a single page can work well. First, one page is often about as much as anyone is willing to read. And remember, when I say anyone, that includes you. Limiting your design to a single sheet means that it will actually be used. It also forces you to think of the most effective way to describe your idea, without relying on other pages or resources to do the job for you. So whether that's a map, or a chart, or a drawing, one-page documents focus your design on the most important element, while still allowing detail through callouts, info boxes, and notes. But one of the most beneficial reasons for limiting your design to one page is that it keeps your design document concise, meaning that you can make it quickly and change it easily. So how do you make one? The first thing you'll need to do to make a one-page design document is to decide what its purpose is. So for example, you might decide that you're going to design a particular part of your game, such as the combat system or a level or the gameplay loop. It can be something specific, or it could be broad and abstract, but what's important is that your design document has just one focus, not several, and that its focus is clearly described, typically with a title. This is the design document's objective, and it's incredibly important to pin this down. Otherwise, your document won't have a focus, meaning that it will be difficult to decide what should go in it, and difficult to use, since you won't know at a glance what the document is going to contain. However, one focus doesn't mean one thing. Instead, it simply means that your game design document is focused on one objective. But that objective may include multiple aspects and systems. This is reflected in the format of the document, which typically includes a main focus illustration or chart with added detail, usually in the form of callouts that support the document's main objective. This way, the focus of the document is clear, but the detail is still there when you need it. For example, if you're designing a level, then you might draw a map, with callouts to pinpoint items, routes, or enclosed areas which themselves can be further secondary maps with their own callouts and information. If you're designing a combat system, the focus of your document could be a chart that shows the different moves a player can perform, depending on the weapon they're using and the button they press, where the added detail could be the relationship between the controls and the available actions. Or, if you're feeling ambitious, there's nothing to say that you can't design your entire game on one page. This is possible because your one page doesn't have to be a small page. It can be as big as you need it to be. It can be an endless document that increases with the size and complexity of your project. But this can only work if you follow the one-page methodology, a single focus that can be expanded to relevant detail. Everything you add to the page must support its objective, and it must be linked to it in some way. Otherwise, you'd just be creating multiple design documents and putting them in one place. In which case, if you're going to try to design your entire game on a single page, you'll probably want to put your design pillars right at the center, expanding them out into the systems and mechanics that will actually make them happen. Now I want to hear from you. Are you using a design document, or are you making the document is going to contain typically callouts to pinpoint items, routes, or enclosed areas which themselves can be art that shows the different move goals and be a small page, if you follow the one-page methodology, a single focus that can be
Everyone, it's me, Tim. I've told a lot of
And
stories
he was one of the
about
designers
game
of
development,
Fallout.
but today I actually want to talk about process, specifically how I make my design documents. I want to talk both about the order I do them and what actually each one contains. So most of this applies to the original IP that I've made, but it can work for other games. I mean, I've made D&D and Vampire, but this is the process I go through when I'm creating an IP from scratch and I want to write documents, because I know once we get a team attached, people are going to want to know answers to a lot of things. So when I do my documentation for a new game, I always do them in a very particular order. I always start with setting, and then I do story, and then I do system. So they all begin with S's, but the reason I do it that way is setting kind of defines the space in which the game will be. The story is a very high level description of what every player will experience going through it. It's sort of they will help define the main story quests, even if there are multiple solutions to going through those quests. And then finally, I make the system mechanics, because it's important to do that last so that you have mechanics that support things you've said in the first two documents. If you have system mechanics that are completely connected to your setting or your story, you probably haven't made good system mechanics. So let's go into each one of these documents, because they're not only very different documents, but they're intended for different people and they're written differently. So for the first one, the setting, this is something that will often be one of the first things that a publisher, whoever's going to give you money, will see. So I try to make that setting describable in a sentence or two. It's often called the elevator pitch. You want to be evocative. You want people to be interested in this setting. You want to come up with a setting that is easy to put stories in and easy to make quests for. One of the reasons I always thought the games that Troika made were so evocative were they were all placed in settings where there was a lot of player agency. There's a lot of things players could do. And that basically means you can't have a setting that's too authoritarian, that has too much law. You can do it, but you want to make sure that there's some kind of room for the player to move around in. Most of the settings I've ever made could be described as, here's a thing that's very easy to explain. Oh, but there's a twist. I think that helps people understand what you're making, and the twist makes them go, oh, and this is why it's original. And then the twist can be used and explored to see what would happen. Well, with this difference, how would this setting be different than other settings that have come before? So let me give you some examples. So for Fallout, when we finally arrived on a post-apocalyptic setting, we wanted it to be different. And Leonard's idea of making it 50s inspired was itself inspirational, because the 50s predicted a lot of things about, if a nuclear war happened, if the Cold War exploded into a hot war, they predicted radiation everywhere, mutations, monsters, gangs of people, robots going crazy. And these were all things we put in Fallout. Just that alone, without even talking about the story, you already have an idea. Oh yeah, I think I know what this game will be like. We did the same thing for Arcanum. When Leonard and Jason and I sat down, we were just saying, what do we want to make? And we had made Fallout because we didn't want to make a fantasy game. So now that we felt like, well, we deserve our own shot to make a fantasy game, we didn't want it to be standard. And the idea was, what if a very standard fantasy world, very Lord of the Rings, very, you got your elves and your dwarves and magic and all that. What if an industrial revolution happened? Because every fantasy game seems mired in the 14th century. Like, they have wagons and water wheels, maybe very, very primitive guns, and then everything stops right there. As if all that stuff would be invented and then invention stopped. So we said, what if tech kept going and magic and tech started conflicting? So that's how we came up with that setting. And then settings like that sort of lead you into what the story could be. Make sure I made notes on this because I want to make sure I cover everything. You want to make sure that your story makes sense within the setting you just defined. Yes, the setting's very evocative, but you want the story to be something that people actually want to do. It lets players explore the setting. You want them to be able to create whatever player character they want. And that's important for me. A lot of games don't do that. But for me, if you're really an RPG, don't assign me a character. Don't assign me a role. If you name the character for me, you're probably already. I want to make somebody who's my conception, and then I'm going to play my character in your world. And your job is to react to it. So examples for that were, again, we're to look at Fallout and Arcanum. In Fallout, what was great is we had this vault which had been sealed. So neither the vault dwellers nor you, the player, knew what was outside. You just knew it was some radioactive hellscape. The nice thing about how we set it up, where there was an emergency, the water chip was a complete MacGuffin, of course. We just needed to get a reason to get you out of the vault. The fact that you could make any character you wanted was supported by the story element that the vault dweller to leave was picked by lot at random. Nobody wanted to go out. People who had gone out before had never returned, so you knew it was dangerous. But by selecting them at random, that let the player make any kind of character they wanted. In fact, if you make a dumb character, you might go, why in the world did the vault send out this idiot? Well, you were selected at random. They probably went, okay, we'll give this guy 2 weeks and then we're going to do another lottery. That's probably what was happening, but somehow you were successful. But I love that. I love that the player could make any character he wanted and going out to look for the water chip, and then he gets involved in something much bigger, which is the survival of the vault itself beyond getting water. We did a very similar thing in Arcanum. Our fiction was that you were a character taking an airship to a new continent looking for work. There was rumored that there was all this work to be had in this great new city, Tarant. And then the airship is shot down by orcs flying biplanes. It was crazy. You're like, I don't know what this is. And you suddenly get caught up in something bigger. And we actually made fun of the trope where you were the chosen one, because Virgil thinks you're the chosen one, but you think he's crazy. But again, we did that. You made any character you wanted. You have a reason to be involved in something really big, but it's not at all what you expected. And again, Arcanum was completely open world. We let you go in any direction you wanted, explore the setting any way you wanted. No matter what direction you went in, we had quests and storylines we wanted you to experience. So that brings me to the third thing, which are systems. The systems, it's really important that the systems you make support your setting, both in tone and in actual mechanics reinforcing what you've just told the player the setting is like. So in Fallout, it was really important to have combat skills, because the wasteland is dangerous, stealth skills, dialogue skills. You basically did not know what you were going to encounter. So we gave you all these tools in your player character toolbox to deal with it. And then on top of that, we put in things like radiation, because of course you're going to encounter radiation. We threw in lots of drugs, because that was just something that this setting would have all these drugs to deal with things like healing and radiation and dealing with poison and just all the things that were going to happen to you in the wasteland. Arcanum was a very similar thing. Yes, we put in spells and we put in text schematics for you to learn, because that was what the setting included. But we also put in the meter that had your magic and tech, because we wanted magic versus tech to be reflected right there on your character sheet. Yes, there was a greater cultural war going on between these two factions, but the war was also going on your very character sheet. Every time you decided to take a spell, that meter went towards magic, and then you learned a schematic, over there towards tech. And you had to think about that. Every time you bought something, you had to think, do I want to move my meter? This was something that involves the player in a very direct way to the setting you just made. Now, something that I think is very important to put in your system design docs, which is something that you probably didn't need in your setting or story, were every mechanic you put in should have a goal or set of goals listed at the top of the page. These can range from really high-level goals to very specific goals. And I'm not talking about goals like let the player have fun, because that should just be a given. I'm talking about, why is this particular mechanic being included in the game? You need to justify it. This time I'm not going to use Fallout or Arcanum. I'm going to use Outer Worlds as an example. So we had melee and ranged as completely separate skills. And one of our high-level goals was melee and ranged combat should feel different and offer substantially different play experiences, but neither one should be significantly more powerful than the other. To some of you that may go, well, duh, but that was something that I wanted to state, because I wanted to make sure that anything that got designed by other designers in the game supported that high-level goal. Which meant when we did the page on melee combat, there was a goal specifically for melee that wasn't for range. It said melee combat needs to be simple and easily accessible for casual players, but have higher skill maneuvers for advanced players. So then when we were doing our melee combat, we made the conscious choice that melee, when you swung a melee weapon, if the target you swung at was in range of that melee weapon and in the arc that you were facing, it always hit. You did not roll to hit. If I swing a baseball bat at you and you're in front of me, I hit you with that baseball bat. The skill determined how much damage you did. And this was very different than ranged. When I shot a gun, the skill determined whether or not I hit at all. But then when I hit, it did damage within the range of the weapon. So that right away made melee and ranged feel different. Then we added additional melee techniques. We added like power attack and sweep attack. So if you were playing, so casual players could just pick up a baseball bat and go boom, boom, I'm hitting the thing in front of me, boom, boom, boom. Advanced players were like, oh, this would be a good time to do a sweep attack because there's 3 monsters in front of me. Or my baseball bat isn't doing much damage against this robot's armor. I'm going to do a power attack and try to override the armor's defense. The fact that we'd written these goals explicitly into all the design system mechanic pages from the top to the bottom meant that when we discussed these system mechanics, we could separate our discussions into, does this mechanic achieve the goal we set out to do, versus, I don't think that's a good goal. I've found many people when they disagree with something, whether it's another designer, someone else on the development team, people who play your game later, or even reviewers, they often don't separate these things. They don't go, well, this game did a good job of doing this, but I wish they hadn't done this. We needed to do that because when you're developing a game, if your fellow developers don't agree with your goals, that is a very different discussion than whether your individual design elements achieve those goals. And you should have that discussion first and get everybody to either agree that these are good goals, or at least the very minimum, agree that these are the goals you're going to try to achieve. If you don't have that, and I've worked on a few teams that don't have that, things will go bad for you. People will be making different games on the same team. I feel like I got very lucky with Fallout and Arcanum that we were all making the same game. Later on, at Carbine and Obsidian, I often saw people not working on the same game goals. And by the way, this goal idea, this wasn't mine. I got this from Josh Sawyer. When I worked with him on Pillars, that was something he was doing. And I was like, this is brilliant. It's sort of like, I've always done this implicitly, but Josh explicitly wrote those goals down at the top of the pages. And I thought that was brilliant. I'm like, I'm stealing that. That's good. You guys should steal it too. Josh is a very good system mechanic designer. So the other reason to do this, explicit goals, so you can have these discussions and you can know that you're talking about, do you not like this particular mechanic, or do you not like the goal of this mechanic, is if you go into design, something you have to realize is that everybody on your team, in management, who will play your game and will review your game, thinks that they're a game designer. They're not, but they think they are. And that means as a game designer, you will get feedback that programmers and artists don't ever get. No one ever walks up to a programmer and says, yeah, I was playing the game and it's pretty obvious you're using quick sort. You really should be using insertion sort. Go back in there and change that. No one ever goes up to an artist and said, hey, I was playing your game and some of the animations looked a little stiff, so I redid all the animations. Here they are. You should put them in your channels. No one does that. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. I've been a programmer. I know what kind of stuff they deal with. They come up with like, your bugs, your code is buggy. Fix it. Also, I know people come up to artists and say the most unconstructive things like, I don't like that. Thanks. That's really constructive. Which, as a side note, if you give feedback that isn't constructive, your feedback is worthless. I know that sounds harsh, but it is. If you give unconstructive feedback, you might as well not be saying it. If you just look at something and go, that's stupid, or I don't like that, that's worthless feedback. Nobody can do anything with that feedback. They're not going to start throwing darts against the wall until you say, oh, okay, I like that. You have to say something more. And that's why, at least for design, because it's almost all written before the game is made, having these goals in place in your system mechanics design let you have much more constructive discussions than just people going, yeah, I don't like that melee weapons always hit. Okay, that's how we're making the distinction between melee and ranged. How would you make that distinction? That is a very different response to give them than, okay, thanks for that comment. Have a nice day. So that, in a nutshell, is how I do my design processes. Story, setting story system, in the system goals on every page. I think if you do things in that order and you follow those guidelines, I think you will have a much more productive system design experience. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Marnix. I'm a creative designer at Bite Me Games, and today I want to talk a bit more about game design documents. Probably one of the core pillars of video game pre-production. I've noticed, however, that a lot of indie developers either don't really know what they are, or if they really need one, or why would they need one, because they're just small teams, whereas game design documents often give more of the thought of, okay, this is something that big teams only require. Also be sure to stick around, because at the end I'll also be sharing some more insight into a free template you can download that I've made to create your own video game design document. Of course, some of you may not even know what video game design documents are. So to first answer that question, I want to bring you a bit through the process of how developing a video game works. We have pre-production and we have production. So in production, this is where we think about when we hear actual development. Here is where we write code, here's where we create all of our 3D models, we create all of our art and all those things, and we really start making a game. Pre-production is the phase when we don't really know yet where we are going to go to with our game. What is our game going to be? And that's where, it's a chiller time at a video game company. So the developers, they're usually just trying around, tossing new ideas for mechanics that could be fun, or other programming related ideas for any possible future games. The design team, on the other hand, will mostly be busy with, okay, we want to make a new game, what's the setting gonna be like? Okay, what's the story gonna be like? What's the art style gonna be like? And they're gonna have lots and lots of ideas of, okay, we want to make a sci-fi shooter, okay, we want to make a Western style puzzle game. Anything could go, basically. And here is where they can just toss around ideas and try and figure out what really sticks. And once they have an idea that they know, okay, maybe, this Western puzzle game could have some potential, we'll give it a nice story, we have a nice mechanic that could work into it, I think this is something we would want to pursue. This is where a game design document comes in. And this is basically a document that's as long or as short as you want. We have a one-page document, we have 80-page documents, as we'll see later, but generally it's somewhere around 10 pages, where you write down, okay, what is the vision of our game? Okay, and then what is, for example, what is the high-level story going to be? Oh, you're a bounty hunter back in the 1800s, and you've been betrayed or something by your guild or anything, and we want to go over that. Okay, what are some cool mechanics that we can say? Well, we have this hand that has been chopped off, and it also works now as a multi-function thing, and as a grappling hook or whatever. You're pretty free in that. And the concept is just, we write all of this down in a document. Okay, so who are our main characters? What's the storyline? What's going to be the core mechanics, and perhaps some other information about the game, maybe some concept art. Then you can bring this document to your publisher or to your management and be, okay, this is what we have created. Go through it, give us some feedback, and if you like it, we can make it into an actual game. Now, of course, I've been talking about publishing and management, and usually if you're an indie developer, that's not really that applicable to you. So it's also important to have this kind of thing if you're a smaller team. So let's say maybe that, like us, okay, I am the creative designer, and Thomas and William, they are more programming, or William is like half and half. Okay, how do we share our idea of, okay, Thomas has a really cool idea. How do we share his idea with our vision? How do we combine the two in a way that really works? And how does he understand what is the story vision that we want to go to? So I would like to go maybe a bit back in time and look at some famous games of which the game design documents have been published. So think, for example, the original Diablo game. The game design document can now be found online. It's only 8 pages, but if we compare that original game design document written in 1994, and we then look at the games that were made, Diablo 1, 2, and 3, we can see that pretty much all of the DNA and the core vision that was written back in that game design document still beautifully carries over into the actual game, from the isometric viewpoint, the RPG elements. And it really goes to show the importance or impact from a game design document, that how what you write down actually becomes the game. Now, of course, this isn't always the default, and it's also not really a requirement, But it's really nice to see that, okay, the designers had that same vision throughout all of these years that they've been working on the game, just from that original document that was most likely created by just a single person. I would like to spend a bit more time on one game-specific game design document, namely Doom, which was one of the first shooters, and whose game design document was written back in 1992 by the creative director over at id Software called Tom Hall. And he made this Doom game design document also known as the Doom Bible. What's different between this game design document and most of the ones that you can find online is that it's very long compared to the other ones. Diablo was 8 pages, Grand Theft Auto is also something like 10 pages, whereas the Doom Bible is 79 pages. And there are a few reasons for that, and I want to talk also about why you don't have to do that per se. So what made the Doom Bible maybe a bit different is, yes, it also shared that key vision, for example, of, okay, what is the kind of game you want? It had explained some of the storyline, it explained some of the mechanics, but it also went deeper. So for example, since it was a DOS game, it also explained how would we make a level editor, what is like the file extensions we're using, what are the tools we have to create in order to create the game, and stuff like that was also covered, which we don't really do nowadays. Maybe you can say that, okay, you want to make it in this engine, but usually you don't go much deeper than that technologically, because that's part of the developers and they need to think also deeper about that. But I think the most interesting part between, if we look at Doom, the finished game, and the Doom Bible, is how they don't really overlap that much anymore. So with Diablo, we can still clearly see some differences. However, if we compare the Doom Bible to Doom, we can see that in the original document, we had this plan of multiple characters you could all play as, and it was way more story driven. And then we look at the actual Doom game, and there's just one character, Doom Guy, and all you do is basically you kill demons, and you kill more demons and more demons. And a storyline was kind of tacked on, because back then storyline also wasn't that important really. Half-Life hadn't been released yet, so most video games were just something, but didn't have much of a game like story inside of it. What I want to make my point with this is basically that you don't have to be too rigid on, okay, I create a game design document and I have to follow it to the T, or I have to use this for everything. No, you use it as a tool you can reference and you can go back to, and you can see, okay, what is the core vision we want to keep. So we can still see the vision between the original Doom game and the Doom game design document is still there. It's just the way we get to that vision and the storyline surrounding it that has changed. So I know what you're thinking by now, but Marnix, all those games you talked about earlier, they had huge development teams, they had funding and all these things, they had publishers, they had managers and all those things. I'm just an indie developer, maybe solo, maybe with like 2 or 3 friends. Why on earth would I need a game design document? It just seems like a waste of time when I could just be programming and working on the game itself. And I understand that, and I do really see that there's a lot of confusion about, okay, game design documents, you just use them for publishers, or they're just very lengthy text blocks that you need to keep updated and everything, and it's not fun. But I do think that there's a middle ground where everyone should have some kind of game design document, which I'll be helping you now as well with. And I want to cover some of the points as to why you should need one of these, or what are the advantages apart from just a publisher, or it has to be done by management. So probably the main reason is it lets you structure your thoughts. Right now you may be thinking, but I have a great memory. I've been working on my game, I know everything about it. Well, yes, but do you think that if you've been working on it for 9 months and you haven't worked on maybe a particular mechanic for maybe 2 months, and then suddenly you need to start working on, for example, a grappling hook system, do you think you can remember enough about, okay, this is how I was going to do it, and actually implement it in the way you had envisioned it? Odds are that no, you won't. Maybe you're very smart and you can, of course. I'm not saying that you won't, or that you will make mistakes, but it's just a safety net. It's not that much more effort to just write down back when you're fresh and you have all the ideas, to just create the concepts that you want and write them down. Writing them down also really helps in just thinking about, would this actually work? Because we have a lot of thoughts in our brain that may seem good in our brain, but once we actually start writing them down or typing them down, we try to explain them sort of to maybe ourselves or maybe to someone else reading the document. And this also serves as a way to see, oh, maybe this concept that I had thought about isn't actually going to work that well. And that's what we want. It's pre-production stage, so we can still very easily, without much lost time or effort, change to something, tweak it, make it sure that it works in the concept of our game. This structure is also very good that, okay, maybe you have been working for 7 months on your project. You now want to work on grappling hooks. How was I going to do it again? Well, let me just look at my game design document. Oh, it states here it was going to work like that. Oh yeah, I remember now. Let me implement it now. It's a very low effort but high gain system that you should use. This second point kind of builds upon the first one, but now instead of structuring it for yourself, you're structuring it for other people. So you have a great game idea, but any game you should always do a trial by fire and just get some feedback on. I understand there's often a lot of fear in sharing your highly amazing game ideas early in the beginning, because what if my friend runs off with it? Well, you'd need better friends maybe. But it's also your friends or someone else you trust, they can provide you invaluable feedback into how should you change the game, what's going good about your game, what's going bad about your game. And talking about them or talking about the game to them is going to be much harder for them to understand what you're talking about compared to maybe giving them a document, like a game design document, maybe even, that has some nice concept art, that has like a 2-sentence in the beginning that's like, okay, this is the game, this is what you're gonna do, this is the setting, and this is what makes it special. And then he can keep that in mind whenever he reads through the story or whenever he reads through the mechanics you've planned or through the timing and all those things. And he can much better give you way better feedback. So for example, also an advantage of writing things down is he can just go through it and see, okay, this part of your mechanic, just highlight it or whatever. I think this is something we should look into. Maybe it doesn't work as well. Or maybe, you know, the part where he randomly kills 4 kids in the storyline for no real explained reason. I think you should further look into that or you're gonna get backlash. Things that you personally may not be able to see that there may be something wrong with it because you've become so in love with your idea that you've kind of turned a blind eye to those things that make perfect sense to you, but not to the rest of the world. Because in the end, what good is it when you make a game that you've poured your heart and soul into if the only person going to play it is your mom? And yeah, she'll tell you that it's a great game and you did your best, honey, but we all know what that really means, I think. Let's face it, I've been talking and we all say in the developers that, hey, we love this and we don't do it for the money, but we all love money in the end. In the end, all of us want to be able to fantasize about, hey, maybe I can quit my day job and just start working on video games full time. Of course, we need some money for that. Or maybe you just don't even want to quit your day job. Maybe you just do it for fun, but it's always nicer to have some kind of physical compensation, some kind of money or some kind of recognition to really prove that, hey, I made something that people are liking. And for that, to get that funding, you usually either have to go crowdfunding or you want to go with a publisher or you want to go and look for certain grants that give you money as well for your game development. And this is where a game design document is something that's very critical, because especially the last two, Kickstarter is maybe a bit less, but the last two, the publishers and grants, they will ask you for a game design document. They'll probably even ask you for a business plan or some kind of market research that, hey, why would we think that your game is going to be successful? And if you think about these things in your game design document and you look at some comparable games, okay, I want to price my game something like 20 euros or $20 because if I look at the rest of the games in the similar kind of genre, they all charge about that much, they have this much sales numbers, so this is what I expect if my game is successful to return from it. These are details that that a publisher really loves and really shows that you know what you're doing and you're not just, oh, you have an idea, you haven't checked it with anyone and you just want to make a game. No, this is what makes them decide that, hey, I want to partner with this guy and I want to start funding him to make a game for me. So, I've convinced you, yes, but how are you gonna start is now what you're probably thinking, because I just said a lot of things of, oh, you don't need to stick to a certain template. Oh, you can make it as detailed or as short as you want. Making kind of process where you can find the game design document. Key titles listed. I don't know more things. If you already carry you through, how has ever questions? Have you had experience with game design documents?
Okay. So I've got another couple of videos I want to have a look at, but we're going to take a 2-minute break. We've got a bunch of templates and also examples from actual real games, so like the original Grand Theft Auto design documents, Doom Bible, etc. A few others from some smaller games that we can sort of base off as well. But yeah, as I said, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, so we'll be back shortly. Don't go anywhere. This is Zero XP Studio. I'm Zero XP Dev. See you soon. Okay, so we're going to come back from our break slightly short. Anyway, this is Zero XP Studio. I'm Zero XP Dev. Tonight we finished off our tutorial on the platformer game, adding some different jump mechanics. And then we've started to how to create our design document. So we downloaded some PDFs of some templates and also some old game design documents from some classics such as the original GTA and Doom. There's some other indie games as well. Just got a couple more videos I just want to have a browse through tonight, tonight's stream, and then tomorrow we can get started creating a design document.
Guys, and welcome to another video where I try to teach you a little bit more about the video game industry. Now, in today's video, we will be discussing documentation, and before you click off, because that sounds really boring, just know that the document in question might possibly be the most important document regarding any game development cycle, and whilst not all games use it, I'm fairly confident that the large majority of games could benefit from using one like this during their development period. Today we will of course be talking about the game design document. I will quickly explain its function, what layout it should probably have, how it can be used throughout the development, and finally give you some small tips and advice on how to frame this document so that it doesn't cause you more work than benefits like the way it should. There is no industry standard for this, so what you might find is that for your specific game or for games that you know that are out there, slightly adjusted or completely different layouts might work much better. So please, if you think there is a better way to express what your particular game or game that you know needs to express, absolutely go for it. And hey, maybe share your results with other people out there, because there might be others who are struggling to come up with a good layout for this document and would still like to use it within their development. Anyways, with that out of the way, open a fresh Google document, get ready for some serious typing, and let's go. Now first of all, while the game design document does have design in it, that doesn't mean that it only describes the design of your game. In fact, this document should basically describe every single piece of your game to quite a good detail, so that if or when handed off to a potential new publisher, they can give them a complete picture of what this game is going to be, how will it play, and how your team is going to make sure it gets developed on time and within budget. It is essentially the complete package. By giving this document to someone who has not worked with your project at all and is not affiliated with your team in any matter, and having them read it should give them the perfect picture with everything included of what this game is. Now, a few additional functions to this document can strongly vary depending on how it's used, whether for example it should include the project proposal, if it's like a backup to an elevator pitch, or whether it is more used as a backbone for your team to reflect back onto and make sure that the project is going on track. And because I don't want to make this video too long, I will in this instance focus on the situation where you've already proposed your project, and this is simply a summary of your game's development and design. So let's talk about the contents. As I already mentioned, the four main questions that this document should answer are going to be: how does the game play? how does the game look, how does the game run, and finally, how we will make this game. Or in simpler terms, the gameplay, the art, the tech, and the business side of the project. But let's start right at the top before this gets too confusing, because every single one of those sections can be broken down a little bit further. So starting you right at the top, you should have some sort of a summary. This will be a 2 or 3 sentence definition of exactly what your game is. As a quick example, you could say something like, my space game is a real-time strategy video game which will run on PC, on Xbox, and on PlayStation 4, and will take the player onto a space voyage where they get to control an entire fleet of spaceships and battle for the freedom of their galaxy. Unique combat interaction and the ability to customize your ship's fleet will lead to an unrivaled real-time strategy experience. In a sense, this is the kind of 3 or 4 sentences that you could say to anyone immediately if they ask you what your game is. And after this point, you should touch up a little bit on the story. This segment can include the characters, if the game has any, the setting, the main points of the narrative, or any additional segments that the story of your game might require. After this, the next segment should be gameplay. Here you want to touch up on the core and secondary loops of your game. How will you keep the player engaged? How does this break down into mechanics and into dynamics, which if you've seen my MDA breakdown you should already know. And this can also include other optional sections depending on what your game is and what type of interactions there are in the world. From that point on, you can break this into 2 sections or make it 1 section, but you should talk about the level design, and in this sense, how the player progresses from level to level, what the environments look like, and how the levels will be connected, which can also be included within a separate design bible document. And after that, a segment on art, what the art looks like, how it helps to convey the feel, all the specifications, and of course, just as with the previous example, this can simply link to a separate art bible document. After that, you should touch a little bit on UI and game controls, and any specifications that go together with that segment. Next up, we already have the looks and the feel, so you should talk a little about the audio, describe it, how does it help convey the atmosphere, how will it be integrated into the game system, are there any new technologies being used. Of course, this can once again also link to a separate audio design document. And from this point on, it's time for the more business part of the project. What is your target audience? And what is the target device that you're developing, as well as your reasoning for choosing either of these. Then you should have your segment on analysis. This basically shows how your game is going to perform within the market and how your team is able and capable of completing it. So this would include some sort of a market analysis or competitor analysis, then your technical analysis, which should most likely be assembled by or in collaboration with the lead programmer, which states any experimental features, any new technologies, and in general the technical approach to the project. And of course, if you will be using any copyrighted or trademarked material, a legal analysis is always a welcome sight. Finally, do not forget about game marketing, how this game will be promoted, how will you get it out there, what places it will be published in, and about your community, how will this be handled, and specifically if this will be an online game or an MMO game, how will you make sure that you can build and maintain community before and after release. For the very final section of the document, you should include some sort of a high-level development plan, because it is very likely that at this point within the production, you're not necessarily sure how many man-hours specifically this project will take. However, knowing on a high level how long you need and giving a specific date for release, if possible, will definitely help you in the long run and with setting up backlogs for how much stuff needs to be done within a certain period of time. Now for a few small tips, within the summary, it might be a good idea to include 2 additional sections, that being unique features or unique selling points of your game, which should be several, let's say 2, 3, 4, or 5 unique selling points that your game is bringing to the market, and also, if possible and if already known, you can touch up on the MVP or the minimal viable product, which is basically what is the minimum that we will be delivering by this certain deadline. Also, 2 important sections that can be included within the gameplay segment will be your design pillars and how your game is based around those, which if you've seen my last video you would already know what they are. and also the user experience that you're trying to evoke on the player, which within that section itself can include a small segment where you describe, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes of gameplay, step by step, how the player experiences them. So now you finally put down your keyboard, your fingers are all sore from typing, but how do you actually use this document? Very similarly to the design pillars, a lot of people could make the mistake of thinking that this is a one and done type of deal. You finish it at the start and you never touch it again. However, you would be losing on a lot of benefits that this document can bring you if utilized properly throughout development. Not only can you use this as a great guideline and a center point for your project that helps centralize all the development and constantly make sure that the project is going in the right track, but also if you're within a company or a larger team, chances are you might end up hiring, getting some extra people, or losing some people and getting replacements for them, and these will be individuals who have no experience with your project prior to this, so giving them a great document that summarizes everything about your game, about your development, and
game design documents. There is no one set way of how to do these. I know that's really frustrating. I know you want someone to go do this, then do this, then do this. The approach I want to show you today is a very minimalistic approach, and it works around a general principle of giving a rough description of every area of the game that you can think of so that you can check that they all work together. Because one of the issues that we have, if you're a solo developer or an indie working in a small team, you will have biases towards focusing on particular things, right? If you're a story person, you get to the story bit of your document and then you'll kind of go into a weird fugue state, write a million words, and then wake up the next day and you've basically written the Lord of the Rings. And then bit. So the game I'm going to be documenting today is called Prophecy. I'm sure there's already a game called that. If you can think of a better name for this game as I describe it, please let me know. The goal is to traverse a procedurally generated world, converting followers, conquering foes, obtaining resources, and convert. There's no super robots you did to someone else, and that's why I've also got these images here. So if someone can't remember what agar.io is, there's an image of it there. And before we move on to our second section, I want to introduce another general principle of all documentation, and that is that you always start with the broadest part possible. The most you always start with specific, like start with this stuff, because to early on it is doing. Now, one of the things I like to introduce early on is design pillars. Game design pillars are there to help guide pillars as a here. Is getting by the types of fun document of why I'm doing. Just going to see the, and one of the things I would advise you do is use this framework called the 14 Forms of Fun. This is a really helpful tool, especially if you're working in a team, because fun is too much of a also sort of hint at progresses. Your player character, your empire, whatever it is, gets stronger. That's a central part of lots of types of games, of RTSs, RPGs, lots of different genres. There's a competitive element. The game is online. It's in the same format as Agario, so we've got that competitive genre elsewhere. Or this next, you're giving them what any of these things are. Is going to YouTube at the moment. Everything to do with think. Everything else about your design will rotate around that, and this is obvious if you're making some. And here's who it's not for. It doesn't will also be made available. And here's the important bit. Never design something that is for everyone, right? Because the game will contain some irreverent humor about religion, right? So it's going to annoy people that don't like things where religion is presented as something silly or bad. The reference that this game has to that subject matter is going to exclude some. Is it going to? The player maneuvers their profit around the game block. Followers, you should only have different behavior. The MVP, minimum viable product version for the base game. So I'm already delimiting what I'm trying to build at the moment. And instead of making the 200-page version of this document, I've also put one of the followers. Right? Don't just randomly go into bullet points when you don't have any reason to. The bullet points have a particular logic to them, and all the things in a list of bullet points should be in the same category. I've also put other follower types might be developed at a later date, but this list is considered the MVP, minimum viable product version for the base game. So I'm already delimiting what I'm trying to build at the moment. And instead of making the 200-page version of this document, where I spend days and days imagining all the variations of upgrades and units and stuff that I could do, which would be a good exercise to do later on, because this is a document that is kind of saying, here's what we're going to make at a prototype level, I'm not putting that detail in. I'm leaving it out and I'm pointing to a gap for me to come back later and fill it in. So many people just make too much of their game before they've tested it and checked it's fun. And this is why, like I've said a lot of times on this channel, I'm encouraging you to build a prototype, get it in front of people, test it, and don't make more than a level's worth of content. Don't make more than half an hour's worth of gameplay until your game has been tested by 10 or 20 people. That testing process will show you what parts of your core idea are worth continuing with and which parts need to be thrown away or changed radically. And that is the reason why I would recommend not making those big reams of descriptions of all the content and all the levels and all the story until you're at that point where you feel like those central game mechanics, those central systems has been thoroughly tested and works. I've also put here, as the player gains faith and followers, they'll be able to access and improve a tech tree similar to the divine inspiration tree in Cult of the Lamb. Again, directly referencing games that this is like. Here they'll be able to improve the passive attributes of different follower types and augment their skills and abilities. This is kind of a good approach, I think. I've explained what the value of this feature is. This provides strategic choices, making gameplay feel different each time, while also increasing the religious theme by tying these tech tree choices into concepts like the development over time of religious doctrine. That's quite a wordy sentence, but I'm basically saying, here is why this system is in the game. Here's why it's in the game from a gameplay point of view, and here's how it fits with the theme. And we're always trying to marry the theme and the mechanics as game designers. Every time there's a believable excuse for something being in your game, it's easier for people to understand. If we have a tech tree, but we call it something like the religious dogma development tree, whatever, then it explains that mechanic, explains that system in a way that fits into the world and will make it make sense to players. As you're outlining your core gameplay, maybe think about how you justify some of it. Don't just describe what will happen in the game. If you can come up with reasons why, then include that as well. Just remember that part of the exercise here is being concise and saying as much as you can in as few words as possible, because that is one of the core, most important skills that a game designer can have. I've listed the controls. These are obviously subject to change with prototyping, but at least I've thought it through. You know, if this project got a bit further on, I might pad this out with diagrams and things to make it visual. Again, respect your reader's time by making your document easy to digest. One of the reasons why I do things like break off into a table here is because someone who is looking at this who initially doesn't want to read it, right? Like a programmer or an artist or whoever, maybe someone like a publisher to fund a game. The more you break up the content and make it appeal to a bunch of different brain styles, people who are more visual, people who prefer tables and diagrams, the easier it's going to be for other people to get on board with your idea, because they'll find your document easier to digest. Making game design documents is very similar to making learning materials. You need to appeal to different learning styles. You need to make sure that there are some images in there. As long as those images aren't misleading, as long as those images help to explain the points you're making, then put imagery into your document. You know, and just to show you a quick example, one of the famous old 90s GDDs, that's actually more of a pitch than a GDD, but look at this from Diablo in 1994. It's filled with all these little bits of royalty-free medieval artwork that really kind of set the tone for the game, and even things like these headings are in a kind of slightly medieval gravestone font. It's a legible font, but it does add flavor to the document, and that's the thing that you can think about doing as you are working on your game design documents, is start to think about the graphic design of the project, start to think about your typographic choices and incorporate them into the document. You don't need to go wild with it, but it will start to make you kind of think about these elements of your game and the visual branding of your game. I've got a bit here about balance, right? Again, it's just outlining the broad approach. I don't go into a massive Excel sheet with all the balancing on at this stage, because I know I can do that. I've done it before and it will be its own document. But at this stage, we just talk about what are the key things to think about. Now, in a multiplayer versus game, balancing is important to make sure people don't feel like they're getting bullied by other players. So I've put here, because the game is a survival king of the hill game, one player can get really, really powerful and just smush everyone. So it might be worth having some elements to prevent players getting too far ahead, right? I put there should be some elements which prevent players getting too far ahead, and I've put one example of this could be culling areas of the map at certain times. You get a countdown every 30 seconds, there's a firestorm here, there's a flood here, and obviously the larger your following is, the more little characters that are following you around, the more of them will get taken out by that. Now, this is an important thing to pay attention to when you're doing any kind of technical writing, is words like should, could, will, that infer different levels of intention, right? So here I've put, there should be some elements which prevent players getting too far ahead. That's not as strong as saying there will be. Then afterwards, I've got one example of this could be culling areas of the map. So could is a less certain word than should. I know this might sound super obvious to you, but this is a technical document, and in order to describe things clearly and objectively, you need to be careful with how you use words like will, should, and could, and the degree of promise that exists in those different words. So this section is an example of that moving from general to specific that I talked about earlier. There should be some elements which prevent players getting too far ahead, right? That's general, and it's reasonably committant to the idea of having a balanced game where players can't get too far ahead of everyone else. And then one example of this could be doing this is moving to a more specific solution, but it's not presenting it as the only solution of like, this is definitely what we'll do. Okay, that's all I've got in my balance and pacing area. Whatever game you're making, it's going to be a different sort of thing depending on what genre of game it is, but it's an important area to talk about and at least have that initial thinking through of what your approach is for this game, because all of these sections are about that. They're about just kind of loosely saying, here's what our approach is going to be to this thing. And particularly if you're working in a team, that's the most important thing you can define at the beginning of the project, is not loads of detail about every individual part. It's more the approaches. The next section that I have here is character designs. Now, remember, unless you are an artist who is also the game designer, then art is not game design, but it does overlap with game design whenever it sort of influences the gameplay in some way. So that's what I've focused on in this section. The art style of the game needs to be simple and easy to read, right? There's a functional aspect of this art where if these characters don't look a particular way, players won't be able to play as well. Given that this is a god game in which the player characters are meant to see humans just as a tool for their own power, the human characters need to be small and to appear somewhat insignificant, right? This is like a generic convention of god games. We don't have players with a big face and a name who we kind of know who they are, or not players, characters. It's part of the god game genre that they should look like ants. That's kind of part of the fantasy. I put some examples from Age of Empires and Populous. Age of Empires not really a god game, but that's similar to the design I'm thinking about. No more detailed than this. The units in Prophecy should be small, and the visual style needs to support the following elements of the game design. And then we've got bullet points because we've got a list of things within the same category. They should be visually distinct enough to have classes like Forager, Farmer, Hunter. The units need to have team color clothes, as this will be a multiplayer game with lots of players. So like a lot of these older RTS and god games had, we need to be able to see which player they belong to by having some color coded clothing. And the characters need to look human enough to care about, but abstract and small enough to not care too much about. It's quite a difficult brief for an artist, but you can see this again. This isn't a detailed breakdown of everything about the character designs. It's just loosely defining, here's what's important to the game design about how the characters in this game might look. The visual style of the game can be 2D or 3D, but needs to allow for the above gameplay considerations. I don't even care if it's 2D or 3D. This is what I care about. This is the stuff that impacts the gameplay more. Setting and world. Right. Remember earlier I talked about using the game design document to limit the project so that you don't make too much too early. That's what I'm doing here. So the game will aim to eventually have a procedurally generated world which changes with each new game. However, and this is a big however, right? The prototype and vertical slice versions of the game should aim to have one persistent world with set locations for biomes, resources, etc. For speed of production, this world would simply have the layout of the real planet Earth, with the goal being to prototype using real-world land masses and then switch to a more procedurally led or customized world later on. If you are making a game with procedural generation in it, like a roguelike platform or any kind of roguelike, I would always recommend that you do this, because you will fall into this pit of just spending ages on your generation algorithms. But this like platform or any customized world later, world landmass have the layout for vertical slice version. How will aim to eventually have a procedurally generated world which changes with each new game. However, and this is a big however, right? The prototype and vertical slice versions of the game should aim to have one persistent world with set locations for biomes, resources, etc. For speed of production, this world would simply have the layout of the real planet Earth, with the goal being to prototype using real-world land masses and then switch to a more procedurally led or customized world later on. If you are making a game with procedural generation in it, like a roguelike platform or any kind of roguelike, I would always recommend that you do this, because you will fall into this pit of just spending ages on your generation algorithms before you even know if there's a game there. So in this, I'm basically suggesting, or I'm taking that one further, right? I'm not saying let's not procedurally generate it. I'm saying let's not even design it. Let's just copy the real world. There's a map. We've got a map already. Now I might have to build the what was it called? The Arctic shelf that went between North America and Europe to make sure it all joins up and you can get across the map. But I think that would basically cut out some production time and allow us to focus on designing the core gameplay rather than spending a lot of time thinking about level design and procedural generation and any of that stuff before we know that the game we're designing is a good game, right? Tone and aesthetics. Again, this might be something that needs its own document. We usually make like an art style guide or an art bible which collects mood boards and references and stuff. I'm trying to put everything in one document here to keep with this minimalistic approach. So I've just put some small bits of inspiration here. We had our character designs from our other games, and now I'm starting to bring in, okay, here are some movies I've seen that I think this game should evoke. So I've got the historic epic, I've got the Charlton Heston movie where he plays Moses here in the Ten Commandments, and you can already see that these movies have a very specific color palette that I could imagine this game using. And then over here I've got retro grim dark fantasy, so I've got a Conan and I've got whatever this is, and you can already see that there are some kind of color palette choices here that give this kind of classic cinema look, and I've picked them out as a swatch up here. And this is a gameplay relevant thing, whether you think it is or not, because making a game where there are potentially 12 or 20 different players on the map with different player characters, like a group of yellow characters here, a group of green characters, we really need those player character colors to pop out, and having a quite dark, neutrally toned world for that will actually help with the visibility of the overall game. So this isn't just a cosmetic thing, and it's not me like dictating to the artist, oh, the game has to look like these movies. It's more using them as a reference point to help us generate certain things like what the characters are wearing, what the colors of the backgrounds are, all of that kind of stuff. So there is a reason for doing this, even if it's not explicitly game design. Now, I've cheated here because the type of game that I'm talking about means I can have a narrative section that just says, not doing one, mate. Because this does not have any explicit narrative. When I say explicit here, I mean overt. There's no story being told in the game except what the players do. The game should provide memorable moments for emergent storytelling, but besides some tutorial text, we do not intend to have dialogue or characters speaking. Now, if you are making a very heavily narrative-driven game, you're going to have a bigger narrative section, and it's going to have subsections, and it might even be better to have its own document. But if you need to do that, then think about the principles I told you about earlier. Start with the broad, start with the general, move on to the specific, right? So your narrative design document needs to start with the broad stuff about the story and not get into right in these different specific. And then, and lastly, another one of these things that indie game developers seem to hate doing, and that's having a business model. And now, this is not necessarily a good business model, but it's at least workable. It's something that I've thought it's just once and then owned for good. That's what most indie games are. But it's an online only game, and those are heavily dependent on larger user bases. If you don't have enough players playing, I don't know, Among Us or any kind of heavily online game, you have to do bots and you have to do different approaches. You have to add single player modes. So we have to have a business model that accounts for this and gets enough players into the game in the first place. So I've put this 3-step thing, one, and then to give, which would be better receiving. It's true. It will have an audience small mod. It all understand the my game, the game in just that like interesting and writing the game together. It's actually lots of design stuff for me. Is tell pro there and gigging levels in there. Very much became same separate document, and for your game design document to be
Okay. So we've got some ideas on where we're going to start with the game design document, what we need to include in it. So we're probably going to kick into that tomorrow night. Get it completed in one night, and then who knows, perhaps get started with actual designing the game next week. So we, as I said, we downloaded some PDFs with some templates and some other examples as well. We finished off the tutorial for the platformer, adding some jump mechanics. So we'll be back tomorrow night, Australian Eastern Standard Time, 8 PM. It's Brisbane GMT +10. Until then, don't forget the YouTube page, 0xp Studio, where all the previous streams are archived. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow night. Have a great night, and see you then.